an illustration of this whole chapter where you see the dragon, and I've got a new feature here on my streaming service. Let's see if this works. So I've just zoomed in to the screen up there, and I don't know how clear it is. It may not be completely clear, but this is just a human drawing, an illustration of what we're reading here in chapter 13. So you see the red, fiery red dragon with the heads and the crowns and all of that. They're standing on the shore. Out of the water comes this strange amalgamation of a creature with all these heads and horns coming up out of the sea. Now out of the earth, which we'll read about later, is the beast behind them with the horns, the two horns, and it speaks, calls fire down from heaven, and it marks people on their foreheads and on their hands. And so this is a human illustration of that. But this beast here that we're talking about, the beast that is coming up out of the sea, is first seen by Daniel. So I want to go back and look at some of these images. Now you'll see again up here some of these beasts that are seen by Daniel. Now I'm going to read from Daniel chapter 7. So you'll have to go to Daniel 7, and let's notice what Daniel saw. If you look at chapter 7, verse 2, Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. So he's by the sea as well. It says, four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from another. The first was like a lion with eagle's wings, and he goes on to describe that. Look at verse 5. And suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear. So those are illustrated there on your screen. Verse 6 says, after this I looked, and there was another beast like a leopard, which had on its back four wings of a bird. And then finally verse 7 says, and after this I saw in the night visions, behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong, huge iron teeth, devouring, breaking in pieces, trampling the residue with its feet, different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So Daniel sees this fourth beast. He doesn't describe it exactly like an animal that we know in the animal kingdom. He says it's different. It's something disgusting and terrifying about this huge beast that comes up out of the earth. But it had 10 horns. So this is something that John is playing off of, as you can see, because in John's description in Revelation chapter 13, he said that this beast was really an amalgamation of all of those beasts of Daniel. He said in verse 2 of Revelation 13, he looked like a leopard, but his feet were like the paws of a bear. His mouth was like the mouth of a lion. And so you're seeing all of these things come together in this one strange sea beast. And so what could these beasts represent? Well, Daniel asks that question. In Daniel chapter 7 verse 15, he says, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit, and the visions of my head troubled me. And I came near to one of those who stood by, and I asked him the truth of all of this, and he told me and made me to know the interpretation of these things. Now here it is in verse 17. Those great beasts, which are four kings which arise out of the earth. Now, here the word is kings in Daniel. Now, we'll get further insight into this. Look down in verse 23, after Daniel is asking about this strange fourth beast. The angel says to Daniel, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which will be different from all other kingdoms and shall devour the whole earth. So I think the best way to understand verse 17 that says four kings is that these are kings representing their kingdoms. They are actually four kingdoms that come up out of the earth. And the final one, the fourth one, is the most ferocious of all and attempts to destroy God's people. And so this is understood as you go through Daniel. If you look on the screen again, I have a chart here where this represents what Daniel describes in his book. The tall metallic image on the left is what Nebuchadnezzar dreamt in Daniel 2 and Daniel interprets. But if we if we notice here these animals in the middle, this is Daniel 7, the lion, the bear, the leopard, and this strange, terrible beast that we just read about. Well, they all are parallel to what the statue represented in Daniel 2 and what these beasts represent in Daniel 7. And you may not be able to read it well on your screen, but the column on the right identifies those kingdoms as Babylon being the first one, the Medo-Persian kingdom being the second one, like the bear, the Grecian kingdom being like the leopard, and finally, historically, what comes after Greece? Well, that's the Roman Empire. So what John is seeing coming up out of the sea is the beast of the Roman Empire. And this is in harmony with what Daniel saw, and also going to be in harmony with what Daniel saw the beast doing in persecuting the saints of the Most High. And so I think that it's important for us to know the Old Testament well enough to be able to put some of these things together. Now, on your notes, you're seeing basically what I've been describing in a sense. My notes are very brief and not full or anything, but that's what I've talked about in verses 1 and 2. And I even have there the chart information on your notes where the kingdoms of Babylonia, Persia, Greece, and Rome are represented by the lion, the bear, the leopard, and the terrible beasts, the terrible beast coming up out of the sea. And so I say there, obviously, the beast that John saw was indeed the Roman Empire. And it says by the end of verse 2 that the dragon gave him his power. So what is John trying to say about this beast? Well, he is going to be doing Satan's work in the world. He's going to receive his authority from Satan and his power and his whole purpose. So the Roman Empire is the immediate historical context of the readers of the book of Revelation at the end of the first century. They're going to be going through a lot of difficulty and resistance from the human government of the Roman Empire against Christianity. And this is what John sees. So again, the sea beast is the human government, particularly the Roman government in the first century, that is going to persecute God's people because, of course, it stands antagonistic to the purposes of God. And so verses 5 and 6, let's go to verse 3. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and its deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. We're going to talk a little bit more about